If you're thinking about buying a Honda Beat, this is everything you need to know. This is my 1991 Honda Beat, and if you're wondering why it looks a little bit different than my last few videos, it's because I have returned it mostly to stock and taken off some of the modifications. The reason I did that is because I wanted to make this video and have it in its standard format, and also because I am selling the Beat. I know. I love this little car, but something else has taken my fancy and I want it. So what is a Honda Beat? Well, there's already loads of videos out there explaining what K cars are in Japan. So I'll just dig straight into the specs, the different editions, how many were made, what features came as standard, what were optional extras, issues to look out for, and what they are like to drive and own. The Honda Beat has a chassis code of PP1, so it's often called the Honda Beat PP1, and that's quite important because Honda also made another Beat which is a 50cc scooter called the Honda Beat. So when you're looking for parts online, you got to make sure to include PP1. The Beat was the last car to be approved by Soichiro Honda before he died in 1991. People seem to make a big deal about that. I'm not sure how involved he was with the creation of the car, but anyway. Like all K cars from this generation, it is a 656cc engine. It's a 3-cylinder with M-Trek, not VTEC. M-Trek stands for multi-throttle responsive engine control. Sounds pretty cool, doesn't it? It's even written here on the sills. What this is basically is individual throttle bodies on those 3 cylinders. So there's 3 throttle bodies. The output from all of that technology is 63 horsepower and about 44 foot-pounds of torque. Unlike the other 2 famous K cars from this generation, the sports cars, the Suzuki Cappuccino and the Autozam AZ1, they are both turbocharged. This brings a totally different character to this car. I've owned a Cappuccino in the past and they are quite different in how they drive. The Cappuccino feels quite muscular, feels a lot faster because of that torque. But the way that this thing delivers power is just amazing. It screams to over 8,000 revs and all of the power is in the top end. Feels very like a motorbike engine. If specs matter to you, it does 0 to 100 kilometers in around 13 seconds with a top speed of about 135 kilometers. Some people have delimited these to go higher, but at 135 kilometers an hour there's not a huge amount of headroom as far as the rev limit there because the gearing is so low in this. I also wouldn't want to drive at much more than 135 in this car, to be honest. As you can imagine, a car of this size with no roof, no turbo, no intercooler, no power steering, just the basics. It's very light, 760 kilos, although this is debated a little bit about how that was measured at the time, but it could be a little bit more than that, but not much more. As you can see, my car is a 1991. They were produced from 1991 to 1996. There was 33,680 produced and 2/3 of them were made in 91. There was 6 different colours of paint available for this car, and the yellow, red and silver cars make up 87% of all Beats, so the vast majority. The rarer colours are white, green and blue. There was also 3 special editions. This one here is just a standard one. The special editions didn't come out till later, I think maybe from 1992 onwards. There's a version F which had green pearl paint and alloy wheels, these alloys. Version C which had blue pearl paint and these alloys, but they were painted white. and version Z, which was silver or green with 3 black gauges instead of the speedometer and tachometer being in white. It also had a rear spoiler and alloy wheels. Standard features on Beats are aircon, but I'll talk about that later on. Electric windows, and on the later models an airbag was standard, although on the earliest ones it's just a standard wheel. Optional extras included alloy wheels. So these are the alloys. The standard wheels were steel wheels that look kind of similar. Other options included a boot spoiler, this luggage rack, this cover for the fuel door, a tonneau cover, which I have over here and have never used. The stereo was an optional extra. You could order a Beat with no stereo. So that is what the standard stereo looks like. There's a couple of buttons missing. I actually have them, but this is not really working properly anyway. And this is where it fits in. I've replaced it with something a bit more modern with Bluetooth in it. And you can get a Beat with that just has a blanking plate there and a little kind of recessed area. And the stereo had a number of options as well. So for this gatherer's head unit, some Beats came with speakers up here in the dash as well as in the doors. There was also a separate option for the subwoofer here, an active subwoofer. Another option was fog lights, which you can see here. Mugen also offered various different parts like body kits, a rear spoiler, a different type of exhaust, suspension, things like that. They were manual gearbox only, and there was no power steering available either, so it's manual only. So how much do Beats actually cost? Well, the market is all over the place at the moment, particularly for Japanese cars and sports cars. Having said that, at the moment you can pick up one of these Beats in Ireland or UK anywhere from say 4 to 8 grand. 4 grand being quite rough and in need of some work. And in the US, they seem to go from anywhere from $8,000 to $16,000. So it just seems to be a bit more expensive over there. So what do you need to look out for if you are thinking about buying a Beat? What are the common problems? Well, the first thing is rust, which tends to be the most expensive kind of thing to fix. And thankfully, compared to, say, the Suzuki Cappuccino, this actually holds up really well on rust, generally speaking. But here are some of the common areas you should have a look at. There is a join here in the sill, and it carries all the way down here. And this is a common spot for rust. Another rust spot that I've seen on a couple of Beats is just under here, under the boot floor. So you can take this carpet out, and just under here. The battery is also back here, so like any car, make sure you check underneath the battery in the battery tray, just in case there's been any battery acid leaking down there and causing mayhem. The bonnets are another area that I have seen some rust issues, particularly along the trailing edge here. I would recommend that if you get a Beat, that you get it undersealed if it hasn't been already, and also do a cavity wax. Both of those things have been done on this car. Another area that is something to look out for on the body is this windscreen frame or surround here. This is actually a decal from the factory, and it starts to perish and come away a bit. You can kind of scrape it off, and I believe you can order that part from Honda still, or certainly you could get any place that does wrapping to do that for you. You could also get it painted, but not many people do that. Mechanically, the main thing you need to be concerned about is the ECU. It lives back here behind the passenger seat. There's a little cubby space here. It's kind of pointless, but anyway, you can stick some small things in there. And you need to remove some of this and some of these plastic panels here to get in behind to the ECU and the main relay that lives in here. The problem with the ECUs is that the capacitors after 30 years start to leak, and they basically start to corrode some of the tracks on the ECU PCBs. This car has already had the capacitors and the ECU changed, and I've also changed the main relay, which is another common area. Main relays are something that a lot of Hondas from this generation seem to suffer from. What you notice when the main relay is going bad is that it won't start when it's hot. It's a pretty cheap part and easy to fix. The other part of the electrical system that can go wrong is the distributor. It lives down in there somewhere. There is another hatch to access the engine just under here, under the soft top. So if you put the top up, you can get to those parts. The distributor cap itself is kind of a maintenance item, and it will need to be replaced every so often, along with the HT leads and spark plugs obviously. I haven't heard of many timing belts snapping. However, it's a good idea to check the service history and make sure that it has been done along with the water pump. Another really common issue if you were to test drive these and find that you can't rev it above 7,000 revs is that the valve springs are put in the wrong order. Basically the intake and the exhaust ones are put in on the wrong side. That leads to the engine running fine but won't rev above 7,000 revs. It is actually quite common. I've heard of at least 5 Beat owners that have had this issue over the last year. Coming back to that aircon. I have yet to see a Beat where the aircon actually works. The main reason for that is that it uses a type of aircon gas that is not available in Europe or America as far as I know. You can get it in Japan, but whether you can get it shipped over is another issue. There is some places that can source it, but generally speaking, your everyday aircon or mechanic place will not be able to do it for you. So gradually over time, it just leaks out and then doesn't work. My solution was basically to take out everything related to the aircon. So I have a whole video about that, the radiator, the fan, the condenser, everything. It's just a whole lot of weight that you're carrying around that was serving zero purpose. I always drive the top down. I think that's the only way to drive a Beat. So aircon seemed kind of pointless to me and I couldn't get the gas anyway. While we're talking about the top, another common problem is, I suppose this is the same with any convertible, leaking soft tops. I've only ever had this car out in the rain twice. Once was recently, and I had forgotten that it's not completely watertight. Generally everywhere it's fine, but at this join here, that split is required for it to fold. It was just dripping a tiny bit. You can lubricate up these seals and that will probably help, but it's just something to watch out for. The other item that is a common issue on soft tops is this rear screen. So this zips up and as you can see it's clear and see through it and there's no issues. But over time, if Beat is left outside, the UV will get to that plastic window and it starts to look pretty bad. Sometimes you can restore them back with polish. Most of the time you can't. If you have a good trimmer, you could probably find somebody to replace just the window instead of the whole soft top, but there are companies that will create a whole soft top for you if you want. Another electrical item is the instrument binnacle. I've heard of a few Beat owners having issues with these gauges not working. The reason for that is there's one PCB that sits behind all of this in the housing here, and there's screws that hold in some of the connections, and those screws corrode and then they can corrode the tracks on the PCB. If you clean up the screws, clean up any corrosion that's not there on the board, you may be able to get it working again, but you can actually purchase some or all of these gauges brand new from Honda, so if you need to do that, it's an option. Coming back to the stereo, I mentioned that the buttons on that one over there were kind of broken off and not working particularly well. It also had issues with the connection with the speakers, which I found out that the speakers themselves were badly rusted. And just generally speaking, I couldn't ever seem to get this to give me a decent sound. I've heard a lot of people report about the optional speakers that go up in the dash here, that the speakers have perished completely, and it's very hard to find exact size speakers to replace that. I had the same issue with the subwoofer speaker here. What I managed to do for that was get a new rubber ring for the actual speaker and cut out the old dried and cracked one and put in a new one and glue it in, and it actually works perfectly. So I have a video about that, and I also replaced the door speakers. And then what I decided to do, rather than try and fix that old one, was to put in a new one that has Bluetooth and much better sound. It's a really strange format, and if you're wondering why this is square and it doesn't look like most stereos, an ISO stereo will not fit in here. It's too narrow. This particular Gather's head unit was made especially for the Beat. So what I did was I 3D printed up this surround to make it kind of fit in with the dash properly. And I used a marine head unit that fit in there perfectly. While we're on the interior, I need to talk about the seats. Like a lot of old cars, the bolsters can see a bit of abuse, and they can quite often be torn here. The guy who restored this car and completely resprayed it also had these trimmed up in leather, so they're a bit more durable now. Same on the passenger seat. But it is possible to get this fabric. There's a guy on the Honda Beat Facebook groups that has actually recreated this fabric. So that is possible, but it's quite expensive. Similarly, the mats. So these aren't the original mats, but if you get one that is original, most likely the heels will have worn away a lot of the pattern there. Or like mine, you'll find one where they've been replaced with something generic. I found a company in Poland that were able to recreate these for me to match the rest of the interior. They're not quite as high quality as the OEM ones, but pretty good for my needs. And the last item is service history. If you can find a Beat with a service history, do. They do need a bit of attention. It's good to see lots of receipts, genuine parts. This one has got an excellent service history. It can be tricky with Japanese cars, particularly if they're only recently imported and they often don't come with history. But it does give you peace of mind if you can find one that has a history. So what are they like to drive and own? Well, I have owned about 30 cars in my time, if not more, including a Mazda MX-5 with a Jaguar engine. Yes, that's a picture of myself. And the most fun car I've ever owned and driven is the Honda Beat, without a doubt. They very much feel and sound like a motorbike engine, and they need to be revved. They feel faster than what they are, so you can really wring it out and enjoy it without losing your license. The gear shift is excellent. I've added some shifter bushings recently in my last video, you can see that, to make it even nicer to use, but generally speaking it's an excellent shifter even after having an MX-5, which is known for having a good shift. The steering is also excellent. It's completely unassisted, so you get a lot of feel. You would think that this cabin is cramped and couldn't possibly be comfortable, but I am very comfortable in it. I don't feel it cramped at all. Again, I don't drive it the top up, but the pedals are also quite well placed. Heel toe is extremely easy in it. The only one thing that I would say is that this rest here for your left foot is a little bit tight to this pedal here. So depending on what shoes you're wearing, it can be a bit awkward. It's a 30-year-old Japanese convertible. It's got creaks, it's got rattles, it's noisy, there's wind noise, there's tire noise. When you're on the motorway, you're going to be doing about 6,500 revs if you're at 120 kilometers an hour. So this thing is not your comfortable cruiser. It's a back road blaster. You can take it on long drives if you want, but it's not what it was built for. The suspension is really compliant from stock. There is a lot of body roll, but it does mean that it's extremely comfortable. I've been through lots and lots of different suspension options, and what I've settled on is some RSR lowering springs on this to keep most of the comfort and give a bit more body control and less roll around the corners, and it's perfect for me. Overall, it fit the bill exactly for what I was looking for. It was an adrenaline rush on short little blasts around the area and great fun to drive when you just wanted to shake loose the cobwebs. What is getting parts like? Well, you can order some parts from Honda Japan, and you can't really order directly from them, so you're going to need to go through a company like Etsuryu, which I can't recommend highly enough. I'll put a link for them in the description. And recently I bought those lowering springs from a company called Black Hawk Japan. They're quite good. If you're looking for body panels or things that are maybe slightly larger, Jesse Streeter is also a good option for importing parts. There's a lot of compatibility with other models, other Hondas from this generation, like the main relay that I mentioned earlier on is common across quite a number of Hondas. The fuel filter is also a part that's shared across lots of different Hondas, so you can still get the genuine Honda parts, but there's lots of other ones. Simple things like oil filters, you can get generic ones if you don't want to order the Honda genuine parts. You can also order from companies like HKS for your oil filter. But one of the standout areas of owning a Honda Beat for me has to be the owners. There isn't really any old school internet forums for the Honda Beat. There is one in the UK, but it's not very active. The majority of Honda Beat owners seem to hang out in Facebook groups for the Beat, or sometimes for the Beat and Cappuccino and AZ1. There's some fantastic work going on there, like Juan, who's making the material for the seats, and he's also working on the floor mats and recreating those. And people making custom parts. I've tried to contribute a little bit myself by making some 3D parts for the stereo, a blanking plate and several things like that. But the owners are extremely helpful most of the time, and there's even some people from Japan who will jump in and try and help. So overall, if you are thinking of buying a Honda Beat, do it right now. The prices, I still think, even though they're higher than they were, are really reasonable for what you get for this car, for what is a very exclusive and interesting car. When you look at what's happened to other similar Hondas from older generations like the S600 and S800, the prices have gone absolutely through the roof, and I do think it's a matter of time before people start going crazy for these. They're still very reasonable. Yes, you're going to spend longer finding parts, and maintaining it generally is going to be that little bit more tricky because you're going to have to get a lot of things from Japan, but those parts generally tend to be pretty reasonable. It's not too bad. Shipping will obviously hurt you a little bit, but all in all it's still very reasonable. The smiles per mile cannot be matched with a Honda Beat. I maintain that. I hope this has been useful, and if you're thinking of buying a Honda Beat, hopefully I've answered some of your questions and things to look out for. Slán!